So I've decided I will be working the East. No, I'm just fucking with you. I wasn't even invited. I would never be invited anyways, right? But this is going to be a video about theoretically justifying the idea of working at the Esports World Cup as like a talent, I guess, and specifically League of Legends, of course, because they just announced the roster for the casters, right, joining. Now, before we get into all of this, right, first of all, from my context, I've been covering esports since 2017. I feel like I have a pretty good barometer of the League of Legends space. I've been playing the game since the game started, in fact, in Season 1, and I've been watching the esports since Season 2. So I've covered the entire history of League of Legends. Not only that, but I've been watching Counter-Strike since the 1.6 days back in 2006. So, like, I have a pretty wide berth, I guess, of like esports history and esports knowledge and things like that. Not only that, but I'm not associated with any esports organization or esports publisher, and I'm not really friends with any of the big esports talent within esports itself or the esports industry. So I feel like I can give a unbiased opinion about this entire situation of casters and talent and stuff working for the Esports World Cup. So first, let's get out of the way that the criticism of Saudi Arabia has been a criticism of the country and not the people, right? So let's get that argument out of the way, because I feel like that's being obfuscated in this entire conversation. The people that are criticizing Saudi Arabia and like all the human rights abuses and stuff like that, they aren't criticizing the people, the citizens, because in a lot of ways, a lot of citizens are just kind of the playthings of the actual government themselves. They don't hold any real power, if we're being honest. So whenever you see criticism of Saudi Arabia online in this whole esports thing, it's not criticizing the people within that country. It's criticizing the country or the government itself. So if you're Saudi Arabian or Middle Eastern or whatever, just keep that in mind. I know it's often tries to get convoluted or whatnot, but that is the case here. And I think it would be in bad faith if people started to think otherwise for the majority of the conversation that's going on. I know there are some bad actors, but now the huge two main criticisms about the Esports World Cup, and particularly about all these casters and talent surrounding it, has been one, that the human rights track record of Saudi Arabia. As we all know, they're not friendly to LGBT rights and obviously women's rights as well. They just allowed women to start driving in 2017. And I think in 2017 as well, they allowed the first co-ed music concert. So apparently women and men were separated in terms of like the festivals or concerts. And so they allowed the first one in 2017, I believe. So pretty wild. The country is clearly very far behind in women's rights. And of course, LGBT rights, because they fucking kill gay people. But these are actually mutually exclusive. You can actually criticize the human rights track record of Saudi Arabia, and you can also criticize the people that have virtue signaled about LGBT rights and then are suddenly working for the Esports World Cup, right? Because that's obviously hypocrisy. So you can actually have these two ideas in your head. These are mutually exclusive, to say that you can criticize people for holding the LGBT rights and then going to work for the Esports World Cup, and then you can also criticize Saudi Arabia for the human rights abuse, right? So now a lot of fans are saying, on online and whatnot, Reddit discussion, even Twitter, that all of these Western casters or Western, fans or people, they all try and play, 10-cent games, and obviously the CCP and how they've done bad shit to Uyghurs, or say if you're an American, you've done fucked up shit in Iraq or whatever, and all that shit, right? That's essentially the definition of whataboutism. That is to say that, if you care about this, human rights abuse in Saudi Arabia, you should care about this in another country, or this and another topic itself, which is literally the definition of whataboutism. We could talk about conflict minerals in the Congo, or we could talk about killing Uyghur Muslims in China, right? But those are completely separate issues. If someone were to have issues about LGBT rights, obviously in the Congo, it's not really known that LGBT people are being persecuted, or in China, it's not really known for LGBT or women to be persecuted in China, right? Those are different ideas or morals or beliefs that you would have. You could, believe that someone's moral, I guess, relativity of what they hold the value is, I believe in LGBT rights, like super high up here. And then maybe I believe in, say, like, I don't know, assimilation of Muslim culture into Chinese culture way the fuck down here. So obviously I'm going to be shouting at the rooftops about LGBT rights instead, right? And to say that you would even give a fuck about Uyghurs in China, that's completely irrelevant. That is literally what whataboutism actually is that if you have one belief of, some injustice somewhere, you should have beliefs, everywhere within the world, right? Republic of Congo with conflict minerals, fucking Myanmar, right, with their civil war, Ukraine with the war with Russia, carbon emissions in India, Philippines, like, dude, I could go on and on about several different injustices around the world. But that's the point, is that you can't really care about all of them at the same time. There's only so much that you can focus on. Anyways, there's a lot of fucked up shit in the world, right? So you literally have to kind of pick and choose which ones you're going to really care about. And, I could literally go on a list of like esports sponsors and say, okay, this sponsor is, they're doing this fucked up shit, like Nestle is stealing the water from fucking this place, and Coca-Cola is doing the same thing over in Mexico. And, like you could go on and shit, but that doesn't really help anything if your focus about, I guess, your moral beliefs and like what you project of, your social justice or whatever, if you try and put it in a different smattering in different places, because obviously you aren't going to get anywhere if you try and fight all these different wars, right? You're fighting a war on several different fronts. If you learned anything about, Germany, that's what happened with them. So now, what I think is missing from the huge discussion, first of all, is, why should you care about what happens to people in Saudi Arabia? Right? Like, legitimately. And I know no one else, no other esports talent is going to say this, because it is quite callous, but it is to say, why the fuck should you care about people in Saudi Arabia? Like, yeah, the part of the humanity and stuff, yeah, sure, but why concern yourself with others? Why concern yourself about another country or another area that is not your own? Especially if you don't have any family over there, you don't have any friends over there, you don't know anybody over there. Why really give a fuck about them? That's the same thing with like the Uyghur situation. It's like, I don't really know any Uyghurs, so like, do I really care about them? Like, to a certain degree, I guess, of humanity, but other than that, I'm not going to put any fucking skin in the game, right? And you aren't going to donate to fucking Amnesty International, right? Like, let's not kid ourselves here. And the whole idea of beliefs with borders is such a ridiculous notion, right? Because that is to say that your beliefs are only, call it, segregated to a specific area, right? To say that you only care about LGBT rights, but only if it's in America, right? But in Saudi Arabia, why would I care? Well, you can actually foster greater change in your local area. That would be one justifications of having a belief in a border. And it's also of like a for instance, of a ride or die type of situation. You think about like the people that you would die for. It's pretty limited, right? It's your family, your best friends, your acquaintances. No, not really, right? So there are certain levels of beliefs that you even have yourself. So to say, a belief with a border is necessarily a bad thing, I think is a false idea of what even morals or beliefs even are, because they are actually segmented at a different level. Now, if you want to get into luxury beliefs too, that's also another thing, right? A luxury belief is, what is it? It's a idea or opinion that confers status on the upper class at little or no cost, while inflicting cost on the persons of, a lower class, right? So it's to say, it's kind of the new Gucci shirts of the upper class, right? To have a luxury belief of, say, LGBT rights, and then they completely throw it away once it's challenged against them. Yeah, that's somewhat fair criticism. But as I said, there's also the idea of like region beliefs or beliefs with borders. I think that's actually a legitimate way to go about life, right? Is to say, if it actually affects your own people or the people that surround you or the people that you love to a higher degree, then obviously you should care about it more. Now, as far as the LPL and LCK casters basically being some of the only ones that, at least from a Western perspective, that are joining, right? Because they're all like Western people, because obviously they all speak English, but they just work over in those regions. You have to think the reason why they're taking this opportunity is because Riot literally shuts them out every single fucking international tournament. You look at all the MSIs throughout history and all the LCKs throughout history. These regions have historically gotten fucked in terms of being able to cast or being able to host or being an interview on the broadcast in favor of talent from the LEC and the LCS. And this is obvious because, first of all, the LCS is Riot HQ, right? So they're in cahoots with all the big Riot higher ups, and they can obviously get hired, and they're just more in presence of mind, right? They probably meet each other in the hallways of like the guy who hires the talent versus the caster, that just works on the analyst desk at the LCS. Obviously, you're going to see that guy every day. You might become buddy chum with them, so you're going to hire him for the international event. But the LPL and the LCK casters have notoriously been the place to where they're the bottom feeders. That's where you go to kind of start your career, if we're being honest. And LPL casters especially, this last 2023 Worlds, I don't think we even had a LPL caster in the semifinals or the finals, right? So and LPL is obviously one of the best regions within League of Legends. So they never get their break. And this is actually one of the few ways for them to get their break and to actually show their stuff at like a real kind of big international tournament. So in some ways, you can't really blame them. I can actually see why they would take this opportunity to do what they're doing. It doesn't, if they've been touting their whole LGBT beliefs or whatever, and then obviously working for this, that is a good reason to call them out for hypocrisy. But if they haven't done that, which a lot of these guys haven't, by the way, if you look at the entire list, I can't really think of any of them, from the LPL and the LCK casters that have really done that. So I don't think you can necessarily blame them in that regard. If that's the angle that you want to attack of hypocrisy, you can't really do that against these guys because none of them have been touting that on Twitter or anything. So as for the other people that have basically done half-ass attempts to save face, to say, I'm going to donate, part of my paycheck in order to do to some charity that might benefit LGBT people or whatever. First of all, it's kind of dumb that you didn't even do your research to try and look for a charity immediately that would benefit actual Saudi Arabian people of LGBT or women's rights, right? Amnesty International would have been a good immediate donation that you could have said, I'm going to be donating to Amnesty International. First, that's my first huge criticism. And that's why I don't think it's an actual genuine attempt to even really try and do something good. It's just to save face. That's my initial impression. And secondly, it's obviously the idea that, you're literally taking blood money and then you're using that blood money to somehow justify your beliefs back home or something. Just don't do it. It just looks really fucking bad. All the fans are correct on this shit. You just look like a fucking asshole and you look very narcissistic. So all the people that are seeing that from the Western Tier 1 talent that haven't actually accepted this event, I would say just take that in mind and just don't fucking do that. And now, if you want to donate for your own conscience and not actually project that to everybody else, yeah, fine, do that. And at the end of the day, that's what it should be about anyways. It should be about, well, do you actually believe in your heart of hearts of, whatever your beliefs are? Then just do that for yourself. Do it on the side. I don't talk about all the shit, like whenever I try and help somebody out, or donate to charity, I don't go and broadcast that on Twitter. So I don't know why all these different talent should be trying to do the same thing. It's a clear way of trying to save face. Everybody fucking realizes it. And obviously we've been calling out the hypocrisy of, rainbow washing from all these different corporations. Don't act like we don't see the same thing within your individual actions as well too. So it's very dumb. Now, the idea that you really need the money, that's just funny in and of itself, right? So the idea that you need the money, this isn't some type of stealing bread to eat type shit, right? We all know that. We all know from the Western side or first world country perspective side of things. We all know that's not the case. There's plenty of ways to eat. There's plenty of ways to make money. In fact, you could go and work, a regular fucking grocery store job or something, or you could be a server at a restaurant or whatever. You really don't have to work in esports. And that's what everyone is conflating within this entire situation to try and justify why they need to, take the bag, right? Like back in, when Frankie Ward was trying to justify her position within ESL and working with people that would try and kill her friends, right? You don't have to work in esports. And this is the idea kind of when people say they need to sell drugs out on the streets to make money. Yeah, that's a little bit closer, to the edge of, do you really need the money? Is, yeah, if you live in the ghetto or something and that's the only real way that you can make any significant amount of money rather than working at a different establishment, obviously getting bullied by your peers, having no respect. Yeah, I can kind of see the world of selling drugs. I even grew up in an area to where I knew a lot of drug dealers as well. People selling, marijuana or even fucking meth, right? Methamphetamine. I knew people like that were selling drugs, were selling hard drugs. Some of them actually had a rough situation, and to some extent, they really needed the money, but also they kind of could have got a job at a fast food joint or whatever and made a decent amount of, obviously not the same amount of money as they would have made selling meth, but neither here nor there. So the whole idea of I need to do this is bullshit. Stop using that excuse. It's not a fucking excuse. Go get a regular job if that's the case. And in fact, and this is why I think, I can actually talk about this, is because me personally, I'm part-time in esports. I don't really in fact, I don't even think I've broken even in esports. The amount of money that I've spent on, camera equipment and traveling and things like that, I actually don't think I've made any money in esports. I think I've lost a lot of money in esports. But the point is that I'm part-time in esports. I have another job that I've set myself up for that I make a decent amount of money, right? So I actually don't need to make money in esports. And this is why I can comment on shit like this, is because, I don't work for any esports organization. I don't work for any esports company. And really, I don't give a fuck if I, get hired by them in the future or not, right? I've come to terms with the idea that maybe my esports career is in fact part-time, because there are very few limited full-time positions, and even those full-time positions, they're being held by the balls by situations like this, something that maybe I'd just rather not participate in, right? So the whole idea of I need the money, don't fucking say that. It's really insulting, right? Especially to all the different people working those shitty jobs. I've worked a shitty job before of working a 9 to 5 at a valet job over in Seattle. I've done that shit. So it's quite insulting when people say they really need the money. No, you don't. You don't need to be in esports. Now, as far as defending the people that are actually doing this, first of all, what I hate about this entire conversation about the Esports World Cup and about the injustices of, say, Saudi Arabia or LGBT rights or whatever is the fact that in order to even know about a lot of this shit or care about any of this shit, or like, you know, even if we're talking about working with Riot Games and like the Uyghur Muslims and CCP or whatever, it's being educated about the political happenings around the world. Most people aren't, in fact. I know a lot of the people in Twitter or whatever, or people that are social justice people, like to think that everyone is educated about certain things that are going on around the world. But really, actually, the typical let's call it from the perspective of an American, because obviously I'm in America, so I know that the best. Most people actually don't know what the fuck is going on within the entire world as far as like internationally. They're just stuck in their own fucking country, right? They're in Boise, Idaho or something, and they don't really know anything that's maybe they came from a small town or whatnot. And so it is very like looking down upon people to say, oh, you should know this or you should know this. And now, yes, to some extent, I do believe that if you're going to the Esports World Cup, you kind of have an obligation to start learning about, what actually is Saudi Arabia. Why are people talking about this human rights abuse issues or whatnot? It's kind of a tall task because it's going to take some time to sift through all the shit of just, okay, maybe this opinion is wrong, maybe this other opinion over here, this news article is correct. So it actually takes a while to have an informed opinion about it. And also, newsflash, a lot of people within the esports community that maybe would have some insight on this shit aren't saying anything anyways because it's such a politically charged topic. So if you want to learn from someone else within esports, there's no one talking about it. So there's no one to really relate to direct one-to-one. The only people that have talked about this are Richard Lewis, Sideshow, and like me and Monty and Thorin. Like those are the only real people that have had conversations about this. So there's no actual resources to get educated about the entire situation. And on top of that, it's going to take quite a long time to sift through all the information. So in some sense, I don't blame a lot of these people for not knowing the intricacies about the Saudi Arabian issue. And also, let's just get this out of the way that esports didn't even want any of this political shit to begin with. At the very start of, call it the mid 2015s ish, when we started to get super politically charged within America, which obviously American politics and morality dictates the conversation of the entire world. I still haven't figured out why that is, but whatever. Is that when that started happening of, discussing LGBT rights or, discussing all these different atrocities around the world and stuff, and also a lot of people getting acclimated to what the internet actually is and social media, then started to become the political discussion. And obviously journalists being on Twitter, there's more political discussion on there, and esports being on Twitter as well too, and the commingling of the two, that has made the worlds collide. But previously, before, if you knew anything about esports, we didn't give a shit about politics at all. You go back in, the early days of Counter-Strike, call it like 2008 or 2009, like no one gave a fuck about anything, right? No one gave a shit about the Iraq war or like what was going on over, right? Like no one knew about that because you just wanted to play video games. So I can actually see a lot of these people, talent or whatever, not being educated about worldly situations because that's not what they grew up with. So why the fuck would they give a shit about what's going on in a different country? Now, another thing about this situation, and that you might have realized, is that there's been no criticism of Eastern teams or players or talent in the general zeitgeist of, the Esports World Cup conversation. Well, that's probably because they really don't give a fuck, right? Like over in South Korea or over in China, they really don't care. They just want to play video games and whatnot, and they don't really care about what's going on in another country. And I don't think that Western necessarily fans or pundits have either the ammo to, understand that culture and, then to be able to criticize them. But also, too, they just come from a different part of the world. Like, why should you expect them to necessarily know the same things that you know about, all these other different countries like Saudi Arabia? And also, it is the idea that the Western mindset kind of seems to be that we're allowed to influence other countries, right? And that, why is there no criticism of, the Eastern teams or players or whatever? Why aren't people talking shit about T1 going to this tournament or whatnot? It's like, yeah, but that also comes from the mindset of Western idea that we need to be able to influence every fucking single conversation that we're involved in, especially, us as Americans. We do that quite constantly. And I don't think Americans realize that because, first of all, I think a lot of Europeans, they look at Western, like American fans, and they say, Americans are so stupid. They're so blind about the entire world. But can you really blame us? You know how much it fucking costs to go to another country that's not, Mexico or South America or Guatemala, whatever the fuck, all those different chains? You know how expensive it is to actually go to all the other continents? You have to spend at least $1,000 to go to any European country, Africa, to Southeast Asia, to Asia proper. Like, it takes a lot of money, which is why most Americans don't go outside of our own country, it's just a reality of it, and it kind of fucking sucks. But also, we have the safety of our own continent, which is pretty dope. So, I think we're missing that entire thing, right? And then on top of that, it also should be realized that from a Western perspective, I don't think we can necessarily comprehend the idea of no separation of church and state, right? Because a lot of these other different countries, especially in the Middle East, they have no separation of church and state. They're the same fucking thing. And in fact, Saudi Arabia used to have a moral police. Like, they say that they don't anymore, but really they do. But all of these different countries have religion embedded into their entire jurisdiction, their entire government. And us as Western minds, we haven't had that since the 1700s and shit. So it's been a very long time since that's actually been a thing. So from our perspective, it becomes very complicated to try and understand any other region and any other part of the world. It's not, by the way, justifying what is happening in Saudi Arabia, obviously. Now, what you really should be doing as both fans and as pundits within the entire esports ecosphere is that you should really be criticizing the teams and Riot Games themselves, right? And this is just focusing, obviously, on Riot Games and League of Legends because that's what I know. That's my universe, at least, that I'm most familiar with. That's what we should be criticizing the most because the publisher has to give the okay to do this tournament. You can't use the IP rights of League of Legends, the game, without Riot's consent. And not only that, they're probably giving this Esports World Cup tournament a server, right? A server to host the tournament offline on a LAN setting, and they literally fly out the server and they wheel it out and they put it in the LAN center and they have it guarded by guards so that you can't steal the source code and shit. And that's how you play on 0 ping at a Riot LAN event, right? So clearly Riot Games had to give this the okay. And it should be said that they are clearly the biggest hypocrites in this entire situation because they're always fucking touting LGBT rights. They're always touting how their entire player base is toxic and stuff. And so they're always virtue signaling some fucking higher moral belief. So if anybody should be criticized, it should be them, right? Because the buck stops with them. None of this shit happens unless they give the okay. But secondly, it should be the esports teams as well. They're the ones that put themselves in this predicament to have to take the paycheck, to have to be in esports, or have to feed their families and put bread on the table, right? So they're the ones that we should all blame. And not only that, some ridiculous shit like Team Liquid, I'm specifically going to call them out, to where on Twitter, they even previously said some fan was like, they had noticed their new jerseys or whatever have the rainbow thing on their Twitter logo, or on their Team Liquid logo. And they said, oh, you're going to be wearing that at Saudi Arabia, huh? As kind of a jokey thing. And then Team Liquid responded, yes, actually we are. Now, if I'm a player on Team Liquid, I'm going to the CEO of Team Liquid and I'm saying, I'm not fucking wearing that jersey in Saudi Arabia. Like, I don't give a shit. I'm just a player in this game, and I don't want to get maybe killed or persecuted or put in jail because I'm wearing a fucking rainbow shirt. That's not something to play with. Right? I'm not going to like ride the line or cross the line in that sense in a different country, someplace where you as an esports team, in the small world, in the small scope of things, you have no fucking power at all. You don't even have power in your own country to do anything. You have trouble getting visas for Americans or for Canadians to even fucking play in your league. So shut the fuck up. I'm not going to wear your stupid fucking rainbow jersey. That's not worth me dying for, possibly, or getting in prison for. So that's just wild from Team Liquid to even say that. But anyways, we should be criticizing the teams or the publishers more so because they are the bigger people, right? We should be trying to punch up rather than punch at each other, punch down, or whatever. And on top of that, just as a side note for all the casters and all the people that accepted this and all the teams that accepted this, you have forfeited your right forever to virtue signal about LGBT or women's rights. Like forever. So just leave that off the table. Never speak about it again. Don't ever really tout about it. If you want to donate privately or whatever the fuck, like, yeah, that's cool. But really, you can't contest that you're taking blood money from the people that are actively against this entire situation. Now, if you don't really give a shit about LGBT rights or women's rights, like in general and the wider scope of things, yeah, like who fucking cares? Especially if you don't give a shit about LGBT rights or women's rights in Saudi Arabia, right? Because it doesn't pertain to you or your people. Yeah, that's fine too. I don't give a shit. Like that would be my personal belief in this entire situation as well. So now the last thing I'm going to say about this, and this is something that everyone should remember as we're watching this tournament and we're covering this tournament, I'm going to be fucking watching it too, is that there will be criticism against the criticism of Saudi Arabia, right? So that will be to say that people are going to be fighting against people talking about the human rights abuse or atrocities of Saudi Arabia and being like, well, look at America or look at all these Western countries or China or whatever, right? So if you don't know, Saudi Arabia themselves, the actual government, has put out propaganda, and they've gotten caught for putting out propaganda, especially on Twitter. They're actually one of the most active countries on Twitter. I think they're actually in something like the top 10 countries on Twitter by users, which is wild considering that Saudi Arabia doesn't even have that big of a population. But so they have what is called the Army of Flies, which is essentially propagandists, bots, several government actors, state actors that are actually on Twitter, and their job is to put propaganda out on Twitter. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this whole Esports World Cup thing. And in fact, even Jamal Khashoggi talked about the Army of Flies, and then he ended up working with some other guy to do the Army of Bees to fight against the flies, right? Whatever. But anyways, so the entire whole thing of this too, from the fan perspective, is you can't really fully criticize any of these esports casters or pundits or whatnot because you don't really have skin in the game. You know what I mean? Like you don't work any esports events, you aren't esports talent, you don't even work in esports, you just watch it, which I'm not saying is not anything, right? We all need, like, at the end of the day, we need fans, which is the bottom of the pyramid or base or whatever. But you don't really have any skin in the game. You weren't offered a job to go work for, Saudi Arabia or the Esports World Cup. So just remember that aspect before, you start doing the whole criticism of all these esports casters and shit like that. And then on top of that, I know that a lot of this shit from, criticizing the esports casters is mostly just trolls. I actually don't think there's a lot of people that care about it because, as I said before, most of what esports wasn't even political. None of the players or nobody cared about any of the political shit to begin with. So to expect that to change so rapidly over time, I don't think that's actually, fundamentally, I don't think that's changed. I think it's changed as far as like the outspoken pundits or casters or, prominent people, yes. But as far as like the hardcore fan base, I actually don't think they're political at all. And I think this is quite fake outrage. So I'm going to end this video with one of my favorite passages of all time. And it's from the brothers Karamazov. And it's actually quite great. And it's quite apt for this sense. So it says, "A man who lies to himself is often the first to take offense. It sometimes feels very good to take offense, doesn't it? And surely he knows that no one has offended him, and that he himself has invented the offense and told lies just for the beauty of it, that he has exaggerated for the sake of effect, that he has picked on a word and made a mountain out of a pea. He knows all of that, and still he is the first to take offense. He likes feeling offended. It gives him great pleasure, and thus he reaches the point of real hostility." Peace.